Hey everyone, welcome to this new episode of the Linux for PHP channel. Now today we're going to learn how to compile PHP from source, and we're going to compile PHP 8. Yeah, you heard that right, it's PHP 8. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome to this new episode of the Linux for PHP channel. Today we'll be learning how to compile PHP from source, and the little surprise is that we'll be using PHP 8. Yes, I'm not making a mistake, it's PHP 8. So let's look at it right away. Okay, so compiling PHP from source using Linux for PHP is fairly simple. Now the first thing we've got to mention is that you can actually already use PHP 8 without compiling it. There is a new pre-compiled version of PHP 8 available, and you can use it just like any other version, and you would just need to call it from the command line just this way, saying docker run interactive mode, sharing the port 8080, and then asking for Linux for PHP version 8.0.0 dev, and either non-thread safe or thread safe according to what you prefer. If we run this and we ask for the version from the command line, we see that we are running PHP 8. So you will be able to start using all the new PHP 8 features as they come out. So if you watch the code repository closely and you see all the commits that are done by the core developers, you should then be able to start using those features as they become available. So in our case, as we can see, we're running PHP 8. And if we simply have a little bit of fun by echoing the PHP info function inside an srvww index.php file, and we start up our servers and we go to our browser, then as you can see, version 8.0 is running. And it was compiled yesterday, February 3rd, and there it is. So you don't have to actually compile it. But what if, let's say today, the core developers added a really cool feature like the await feature that is supposed to be added on later this year or at the beginning of next year sometime, and you decide that you want to have it right away. You don't want to wait for Linux for PHP, and you want to start using it as soon as it's available. Well, you can also compile it from scratch, from source. So we're now going to do that, and we will compile PHP, but we will be using a Docker file. So why not use it with the Docker Compose, right? So here we'll be using version 3 of Docker Compose. We are going to give our container the name Linux for PHP 8.1. We're going to actually ask it to tag it at 800 dev. So this could be anything you want. For example, I could decide to take off the dev and keep it at 800, or I could decide to give it another name. Anyway, it's your choice, right? So from there, I'm going to tell it where to find the Docker file, and I'm going to give the command LfPHP -phpfpm -apache to tell it to start up the services as soon as it runs, right? And from there, I'm going to say anything that's on standard in and standard out, please redirect to null, and I'm going to make it available on port 8181. If I look at my Docker file now, I see that I'm starting off from a version of Linux for PHP that is named SRC. This is the version of Linux for PHP you want if you want to compile from source, right? Then I'm going to simply echo a PHP info function in index.php file so that we can actually see the results. And from there, I'm going to run the command LfPHP compile 8.0.0 non-thread safe. The LfPHP compile function is a special function that's available inside Linux for PHP containers, and it allows you to compile from source without actually giving all the configure parameters. It will use the most common ones, and of course it will configure, it will compile and install the new version of PHP for you. So if we go ahead and run this now, and we go back to the command line, and we actually run docker compose up, and we ask it to run in daemon mode. As we can see, it's actually using the source image of Linux for PHP. It updated the code repository, and now it is configuring. Once it has done its configuration, it'll start compiling, and then it will install. So to speed things up a little bit, we're going to actually fast forward our video here, and as you can see with the minutes that will be passing, it will be roughly about 10 minutes. So see you on the other side. And now, as we can see, it's done. So if we go to port 8181, we should now see that on this port we also get an answer with PHP 8 running. So it's pretty cool. From there I can reuse this image, keep it, and use it for development or whatever, and it's there. So I can recompile it by destroying the image and forcing a rebuild, but basically once you've compiled it once, you can reuse it instantaneously whenever you need it. So that's pretty cool, right? Now the last example is that we can actually compile PHP ourselves manually, right? So if we go back to the user documentation, we can see that we can manually compile PHP from source. So again, you need to use the src image of Linux for PHP, and then you just need to run a few git commands, a couple of git commands, and you rebuild the configuration file, and from there you enter any configuration option that you need. For example, in this case we're adding enable opcache, and we're using XML RPC, we're using libsodium, so whatever. If you need to customize the list of configuration options, then this is the way to do it. So basically you just call the src image and then you start compiling. So it's just that easy, and from there you start your services. Doing it this way, you'll be doing it manually, and you'll be getting the same result as if you had run the LfPHP compile script using Docker Compose. So it's just that easy. Okay, so to finish tonight's video, we're gonna be talking about Linux for Composer. Now if we go back to the official website and we look at the Linux for Composer official documentation, Linux for Composer is actually a little helper library that you can use directly in PHP, and it allows you to run multiple versions of Linux for PHP simultaneously on the same base code. We're going to give you a little example of that, and we're going to actually compile PHP inside one of the containers. You'll see how easy it is to compile a version of PHP and running any version on any code base. So there you go. So let's start it off. We're simply going to echo a PHP info file, and from there we're going to ask for Linux for Composer. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to copy a composer file in here, and we're going to self-update it, and then we're going to ask for Linux for Composer. So Linux for Composer is a helper library programmed in PHP that allows you to easily run Linux for PHP. So this adds in the Linux for Composer library. So as we can see, it has installed version 1.0.2. So if I have a look at the contents of the folder now, as you can see, I have a vendor folder, index.php, composer, composer lock, and composer JSON. So what we're going to do now, we're going to run Linux for Composer, and we're going to run the Docker run command and give it the start option. So this actually initializes Linux for Composer. If we go back, we now have a Linux for Composer JSON file. Now if we open this up, we can see that we have by default these versions of PHP that are going to be executed. In fact, we're going to be running these Linux for PHP containers. So what we're going to do, we're going to change that. We're going to ask for another version. So we're going to ask here for 8.0.0, and we're going to run these on ports that are easily identifiable. So for our 8.0, we'll be running it on 8080. For 7.3, we'll be running it on 7.3.7.3. And 7.2 will be running on 7.2.7.2, and then 7.1 will be running on 7.1.7.1. Now on Unix, we can share the present working directory in this way by giving it an environment variable and sharing it inside the container at the srv/www, which is the default public folder for the Apache web server. You can also use Nginx inside the container. It is also available. In our case, we'll be starting the PHP FPM and the Apache services by default in detached mode. So what this is going to do now, if I save this and I go back to my command line and I run this command, and it starts all the available containers according to the versions that I asked for. So if I now ask Docker to give me the list, as we can see, we have 7.1, 7.2, 7.3 running, and the other one is a source image, and it's actually going to compile, right? So let's have a look. Let's go inside that container to see what's going on. So if I copy, and then I docker exec an interactive command line, I put in the ID and I ask for bin bash, and then I run the top command. As we can see, we have a configure running in a bash terminal. So it is actually compiling PHP from source because it did not find that version in the official Docker Hub repositories. So it's actually compiling it for you automatically, and when it's going to be ready, we'll have it on all the different ports. So if we go to the first ones that are already running, I can go to the browser and ask for localhost, and then I ask for 7.1.7.1, and as we can see, I get version 7.1. If I do the same thing now with 7.2, I get 7.2. And finally, if I enter 7.3, I get PHP 7.3. And in a few moments, when I will go to localhost 8080, it will be a PHP 8.0 version running. Okay, so after about another 10 minutes, as we can see, the compilation is over, and now we see that the services have been started automatically according to what we had asked for inside the Linux for Composer file. So we have Apache and we have a PHP FPM running. So now if we go to our browser and we ask for port 8080, we now have PHP 8. Wow, now that's pretty cool. Now the last thing that we have to mention about Linux for Composer for today is that if you decide to stop the containers, so instead of giving the start command, you give the stop command. Well, Linux for Composer will actually ask you, do you wish to commit each container? So the version 8 that you've just compiled, you don't have to recompile it next time. It's going to be ready. It's going to be available because you're going to save it and give a name to it. So if I say yes, and I give a name to it, and I say, oh, I want it to be named custom 8.0.0, and I'm going to call it dev, and I press enter, and it's actually going to ask me, do you want to save this to your Linux for Composer file? So next time you do start, it's going to actually start it up directly, right? So you won't have to wait 10 minutes for it to be available. It will be available instantaneously. So this is another way you can compile PHP 8 using Linux for PHP and the helper library Linux for Composer. Well, one thing is for sure, compiling PHP has never been so easy. So hope that all these tools will be very useful to you, either if you decide to compile it manually yourself or using a Docker Compose file, or compiling it through Linux for Composer. Whatever your choice, hope it will be useful to you, and hope to see you all next time. Bye-bye.